Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping quietly into the world of Roman sports, where entertainment meant something entirely different than what we know today. Ever wonder how many animals died just to make one afternoon at the Colosseum memorable? So before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like and subscribe if you enjoy our nighttime stories. Now it's time to dim the lights and let the story carry you away. Picture this. It's dawn in Rome, 107 AD, and beneath the marble seats of the Circus Maximus, a small army of slaves is already at work, methodically checking every single rope, pulley, and trapdoor that will determine whether today's chariot race ends in glory or gruesome spectacle. The morning air carries the scent of fresh sawdust being spread across the track, not for decoration, but to absorb the blood that everyone knows will inevitably stain the sand by afternoon. The preparation begins hours before any spectator arrives, in the cool darkness of underground chambers, where specialized workers called bestiari carefully inventory their living cargo. Each lion, bear, and leopard must be catalogued, not just by species, but by temperament, hunger level, and previous performance record. Yes, they really did keep performance records for wild animals. A particularly aggressive leopard might be noted as excellent for morning executions, unsuitable for elaborate hunts, while a sluggish bear could be marked down as requires additional prodding, best used with experienced gladiators only. The Romans approached their entertainment with the same methodical precision they brought to road construction or tax collection. Every aspect of a gladiatorial show was governed by detailed regulations, from the exact measurements of arena sand depth. It had to be precisely 4 inches to properly absorb impact, to the specific types of wood that could be used for weapon handles. Oak was preferred for shields because it splintered in predictable patterns, creating dramatic but rarely fatal wounds. Pine was forbidden entirely, after several embarrassing incidents where weapons broke at crucial moments, leaving gladiators awkwardly apologetic in front of 50,000 spectators. But the really bizarre part came when they discovered that crowd management required its own specialized bureaucracy. The editor, or sponsor of the games, employed a team of professional crowd readers whose sole job was to monitor the audience's mood and predict when they might turn violent. These men, called plausus observators, would position themselves throughout the stadium, watching for telltale signs, rhythmic foot stamping that indicated boredom, the particular way spectators leaned forward when they smelled blood, or the dangerous silence that fell when a popular gladiator was clearly outmatched. The morning of any major games began with what can only be described as Rome's most morbid version of a production meeting. Trainers, animal handlers, physicians, and even priests would gather in a small chamber beneath the arena floor to coordinate the day's schedule. They worked from detailed scrolls that read like the world's most disturbing itinerary. Hour 1, criminal executions by bear. Estimated duration 15 minutes per condemned. Hour 2, gladiator preliminaries. Novice fighters, low stakes betting only. Hour 3, animal hunts. Release leopards through gate 7. Hunters enter through gates 2 and 5. The precision extended to the most minute details. Take the matter of arena sand, for instance. It wasn't just any sand. It was specifically imported from Egypt, sifted through bronze meshes to achieve uniform grain size, then mixed with sawdust in exact proportions, determined by season and humidity. Summer required a different blend than winter, because blood absorbed differently in varying temperatures. The sand was raked between each event in careful geometric patterns, not for aesthetics, but because the grounds crew had learned that certain designs helped spectators better see blood spatter from their seats. Every gladiator was assigned a specific type of armor, not just for combat effectiveness, but for dramatic impact. The retiarius, with his net and trident, fought nearly naked, because the crowd enjoyed seeing muscle definition and minor wounds. The Murmillo, heavily armoured, with a distinctive fish-crested helmet, was designed to move slowly and dramatically, creating tension through deliberate, weighty combat. Each armour type was maintained by specialised craftsmen who understood that a properly dented shield told a story, while a pristine one suggested its owner was either inexperienced or cowardly. The betting system alone employed hundreds of clerks who worked in shifts around the clock during major games. They maintained detailed records, not just of wins and losses, but of fighting styles, preferred weapons, even dietary habits that might affect performance. A gladiator who ate too much bread was noted as sluggish in afternoon heat, while one who preferred meat was marked as aggressive but tires quickly. These records were cross-referenced with weather patterns, time of day, and even the specific types of animals that would be featured in preliminary events, since the smell of blood was known to affect different fighters in predictable ways. The Romans discovered that spectacle required the same systematic approach as warfare or governance. They developed detailed protocols for every conceivable scenario: what to do if a lion refused to attack, how to handle a gladiator who begged for mercy too convincingly, the proper procedure when a criminal being fed to wild animals took longer than scheduled to die. There were backup plans for backup plans, all recorded in meticulous detail by scribes who treated arena logistics with the same seriousness as military campaigns. Behind the scenes, an entire economy revolved around the prediction and management of violence. Professional wound assessors evaluated injured gladiators to determine whether they could continue fighting or should be granted mercy. These men, trained in basic medicine, could identify 17 different types of sword wounds and predict recovery times with startling accuracy. Their recommendations influenced not just individual fights, but betting odds, scheduling decisions, and even the purchase of replacement gladiators. The training schools themselves operated like small cities, complete with their own administrative hierarchies, internal courts, and economic systems. A successful gladiator might own slaves, rent equipment to newer fighters, or even invest in small businesses outside the arena. The paperwork involved in managing these arrangements was staggering: contracts for equipment rental, insurance policies for valuable fighters, detailed medical records, and performance evaluations that read like modern corporate reviews. What's particularly fascinating is how seriously the Romans took the theatrical aspects of their violence. Every execution, every hunt, every gladiatorial combat was carefully choreographed to maximize emotional impact. They developed a complex vocabulary for describing different types of dramatic tension: the slow build-up of a heavily armored fight, the quick brutality of criminal executions, the elaborate spectacle of staged hunts featuring exotic animals and elaborate props. Professional scene designers created elaborate backdrops for different types of events. A morning of criminal executions might feature painted backdrops depicting the criminal's supposed crimes, while gladiatorial combats used portable structures that could transform the arena floor into forests, naval battles, or even miniature cities. These sets were constructed and dismantled by specialized crews who worked with the precision of military engineers, because a wobbly backdrop could ruin the illusion that made violence into entertainment. The Romans even developed standardized gestures and calls that spectators could use to communicate their desires to the arena management. A particular hand signal indicated approval for mercy, another demanded death, and a third suggested that the current entertainment was boring and something else should be brought out immediately. Professional gesture readers, positioned throughout the crowd, would relay these signals to the arena floor using flag systems that had been adapted from military communications. But that wasn't even the strangest part. The Romans maintained detailed dietary records for every animal in their menageries, not just to keep them healthy, but to ensure they would behave predictably during events. A well-fed lion was more likely to play with its prey, creating extended entertainment, while a hungry one would kill quickly and efficiently. Bears were fed specific combinations of meat and honey to make them sluggish enough for safe handling, but aggressive enough for dramatic effect. The logistical complexity extended to the smallest details. Arena sand was changed between different types of events, because the Romans discovered that certain animals could smell the fear of previous victims and would behave differently as a result. They developed protocols for cleaning blood from marble seats, techniques for removing the scent of death from betting areas, and methods for ensuring that the privileged seating sections never caught unpleasant odors from the arena floor. Every aspect of Roman sports entertainment was governed by detailed regulations that were updated annually based on the previous year's incidents. The rules covered everything from the proper way to dispatch a wounded animal to the exact phrasing that should be used when announcing different types of events. There were penalties for arena workers who failed to maintain proper sand depth, specific punishments for gladiators who showed insufficient enthusiasm, and complex procedures for handling equipment failures during crucial moments. The Romans approached their entertainment with a bureaucratic thoroughness that would be familiar to any modern administrator. They maintained personnel files on gladiators that included not just combat statistics, but psychological profiles, family backgrounds, and detailed notes on crowd appeal. Popular fighters received better food, improved medical care, and choice of weapons, while less successful ones were systematically relegated to less prestigious events and lower quality equipment. The training regimens were as detailed as the record keeping. Gladiators followed precise exercise schedules that varied by season, weapon specialty, and upcoming opponents. Their diets were carefully managed not just for health, but for dramatic effect. Certain foods were believed to make fighters more aggressive, while others were thought to improve their ability to withstand pain. The Romans kept detailed records of which dietary combinations produced the most entertaining fights. Professional trainers developed specialized techniques for different types of combat. Net fighters learned specific footwork patterns that would create the most dramatic near misses, while heavily armored gladiators practiced movements designed to emphasize the weight and power of their equipment. Even the way a fighter fell when defeated was choreographed to maximize audience satisfaction. A good gladiator knew how to die dramatically enough to earn posthumous bonuses for his family. The betting system evolved into something approaching modern statistical analysis. Professional handicappers maintained detailed records of fighter performance under different conditions, how they fought in rain versus sunshine, their success rates against different types of opponents, even their performance at different times of day. These statistics were compiled into betting guides that were updated daily and sold to serious gamblers who treated arena attendance as a form of investment. The Romans developed elaborate protocols for handling every possible disruption to their entertainment. There were procedures for crowd riots, animal escapes, equipment failures, and weather emergencies. Arena management maintained detailed emergency plans that included evacuation routes, communication systems, and backup entertainment options. If the main event was cancelled due to rain, spectators might be treated to impromptu poetry recitations or abbreviated gladiatorial demonstrations using wooden weapons. The financial complexity of Roman sports rivaled that of any modern entertainment industry. Successful gladiators could earn endorsement deals with weapon manufacturers, receive performance bonuses from wealthy patrons, and even collect appearance fees for attending private parties. The most popular fighters employed personal managers who negotiated contracts arranged training facilities, and managed their public images with the same attention to detail that modern athletes receive. Even the medical care provided to gladiators was systematically organized. Arena physicians developed specialized treatments for different types of wounds, maintained detailed records of recovery times, and even experimented with early forms of performance-enhancing drugs. They understood that keeping fighters alive and healthy was essential to maintaining the quality of entertainment, so they invested considerable resources in medical research and treatment protocols. The Romans created elaborate ranking systems for gladiators that took into account not just wins and losses, but fighting style, crowd appeal, and dramatic flair. These rankings influenced everything from match scheduling to equipment allocation. A highly ranked gladiator might be given first choice of weapons and armor, while lower ranked fighters had to accept whatever equipment remained available. The social hierarchy within gladiatorial schools was as complex as Roman society itself. Successful fighters could own property, marry, and even adopt children. They formed their own internal economies, lending money to newer gladiators, renting equipment, and investing in small businesses. The paperwork required to manage these relationships was handled by specialized clerks who understood both gladiatorial customs and Roman commercial law. The financial records kept by arena management reveal just how thoroughly the Romans had systematized their approach to public entertainment. Each gladiator's economic value was calculated using complex formulas that considered training costs, equipment expenses, medical care, and potential earnings over their projected career span. These calculations were updated monthly, with adjustments made for injuries, performance improvements, or changes in crowd appeal. A gladiator who suffered a facial scar might see his value decrease if it made him less attractive to spectators, or increase if it gave him a more fearsome appearance. The Romans developed sophisticated insurance systems to protect their investments in gladiators and exotic animals. Policies covered everything from training injuries to deaths in combat, with premiums calculated based on detailed risk assessments. A gladiator who favored aggressive tactics paid higher premiums than one who fought defensively, while animals were rated based on species, age, and behavioral patterns. The paperwork involved in processing these insurance claims was handled by specialized clerks who understood both actuarial principles and the unpredictable nature of arena combat. Professional scouts traveled throughout the empire, identifying potential gladiators among prisoners of war, condemned criminals, and volunteers seeking fame or fortune. These scouts maintained detailed reports on regional fighting styles, weapon preferences, and physical characteristics that might appeal to Roman audiences. They understood that diversity in combat styles was essential to maintaining spectator interest, so they actively sought fighters from different cultural backgrounds who could bring unique techniques to the arena. The training facilities themselves were marvels of organization and efficiency. Each school maintained detailed schedules that allocated training time based on gladiator rank, upcoming fights, and seasonal considerations. Morning sessions focused on basic conditioning and weapon drills, while afternoons were reserved for specialized training and sparring matches. The facilities included separate areas for different types of combat training, medical treatment, equipment maintenance, and even recreational activities that were believed to improve fighter morale. The Romans discovered that psychological preparation was as important as physical training. Professional counselors, often former gladiators themselves, worked with fighters to develop mental techniques for managing fear, pain, and crowd pressure. These sessions were carefully documented, with notes on each gladiator's psychological strengths and weaknesses. A fighter who performed well under pressure might be scheduled for high-stakes matches, while one who became nervous in large crowds would be assigned to smaller, less prestigious events. Equipment management alone required an entire bureaucracy. Each piece of gladiatorial gear was individually catalogued, inspected regularly, and assigned based on complex criteria that considered fighter skill level, crowd appeal, and dramatic requirements. Weapons were maintained by specialized craftsmen who understood that a sword's balance could determine the outcome of a fight, while armor was fitted by experts who knew that proper protection could mean the difference between injury and death. The Romans maintained detailed records of spectator preferences that influenced everything from match scheduling to concession stand offerings. They discovered that certain combinations of fighters and animals produced more enthusiastic crowd responses, while others led to boredom or even hostility. This information was compiled into comprehensive guides that helped arena managers plan events that would maximize both attendance and audience satisfaction. Professional announcers developed specialized techniques for building crowd excitement and managing audience emotions. They used specific vocal patterns, gestures, and phrasing that had been refined through years of experience. The timing of announcements was carefully choreographed to create maximum dramatic impact, with different techniques used for different types of events. A criminal execution required a different approach than a gladiatorial combat, and the announcers were trained to adjust their style accordingly. The Romans even developed standardized procedures for handling gladiator retirement. Successful fighters who survived long enough to earn their freedom received detailed documentation of their service, including records of victories, injuries, and crowd appeal ratings. Many retired gladiators went on to become trainers or managers, bringing their experience to new generations of fighters. The transition from active combat to retirement was managed through formal programs that included career counseling, financial planning, and job placement assistance. The seasonal nature of gladiatorial games required careful planning and resource management. Winter months saw reduced activity due to weather constraints, but this period was used for intensive training, equipment maintenance, and facility improvements. Spring brought renewed activity as new fighters were recruited and trained, while summer was the peak season for major spectacles. Fall was dedicated to final preparations for the year's most prestigious events, including the elaborate games that celebrated military victories or imperial anniversaries. The Romans understood that maintaining public interest required constant innovation and variety. They developed new types of combat, introduced exotic animals from distant provinces, and created elaborate theatrical productions that combined entertainment with education. These innovations were carefully tested in smaller venues before being introduced to major arenas, ensuring that new ideas would enhance rather than detract from the overall spectacle. Behind every successful gladiatorial school was a complex network of suppliers, trainers, medical personnel, and administrative staff. The coordination required to manage these relationships was handled through detailed contracts that specified everything from food quality to training schedules. Regular inspections ensured that standards were maintained, while performance reviews determined which suppliers and staff members would be retained for future seasons. The Romans developed sophisticated methods for predicting and managing crowd behavior during events. They understood that spectator mood could shift rapidly based on weather, time of day, quality of entertainment, and even political events happening elsewhere in the empire. Professional crowd managers used this knowledge to adjust event pacing, modify announcements, and even change the order of scheduled fights to maintain optimal audience engagement. The medical care provided to gladiators was remarkably advanced for its time. Arena physicians developed specialized treatments for common combat injuries, maintained detailed medical records, and even conducted research into pain management and wound healing. They understood that keeping fighters healthy was essential to the economic success of gladiatorial enterprises, so they invested considerable resources in medical equipment, supplies, and training. The Romans created elaborate systems for managing the careers of individual gladiators. Each fighter's progress was tracked through detailed records that included training performance, combat statistics, crowd reaction scores, and financial earnings. This information was used to make decisions about fight scheduling, equipment allocation, and career development opportunities. Successful gladiators might be promoted to more prestigious schools or given opportunities to train newer fighters. Professional gamblers developed sophisticated analysis techniques for predicting fight outcomes. They maintained detailed databases of gladiator performance under various conditions, studied fighting styles and weapon preferences, and even tracked the influence of weather and crowd mood on combat results. The most successful gamblers treated arena betting as a full-time profession, employing assistants to gather information and analyze trends. The Romans understood that gladiatorial entertainment was as much about storytelling as it was about combat. They developed elaborate narratives around individual fighters, creating backstories that enhanced crowd engagement and emotional investment. These stories were promoted through various media, including painted advertisements, public announcements, and even primitive forms of merchandise. Popular gladiators became celebrities whose personal lives were followed as closely as their combat careers. The training regimens used in gladiatorial schools were based on decades of accumulated knowledge about human performance and combat effectiveness. Trainers understood that different types of fighters required different approaches to conditioning, skill development, and psychological preparation. They developed specialized programs for each weapon category, taking into account the unique physical and mental demands of different fighting styles. The Romans maintained detailed records of animal behavior and training techniques. They discovered that different species required different approaches to handling and preparation, and that individual animals within species could vary significantly in temperament and trainability. This knowledge was compiled into comprehensive guides that helped animal handlers predict behavior and manage risks during arena events. The economic impact of gladiatorial entertainment extended far beyond the arenas themselves. Local economies benefited from increased trade, tourism, and employment opportunities created by major games. Merchants specialized in supplying arena needs, craftsmen focused on gladiatorial equipment, and service providers catered to the needs of visiting spectators. The Romans understood that successful entertainment venues generated economic benefits that extended throughout their communities. The Romans developed sophisticated crowd control techniques that were based on detailed studies of human behavior in large groups. They understood that spectator mood could be influenced by factors such as seating arrangements, sight lines, temperature, and even the color of decorations. Arena architects incorporated these insights into their designs, creating facilities that maximized both safety and entertainment value. Professional critics and reviewers evaluated gladiatorial performances using standardized criteria that considered technical skill, dramatic flair, crowd appeal, and overall entertainment value. These reviews influenced public opinion, affected betting odds, and even determined future career opportunities for fighters. The most respected critics were consulted by arena managers when planning major events or making decisions about gladiator careers. The Romans created elaborate ceremonies and rituals that enhanced the theatrical aspects of gladiatorial entertainment. These included pre-fight processions, victory celebrations, and memorial services for fallen fighters. Each ceremony was carefully choreographed to maximize emotional impact and create memorable experiences for spectators. The protocols governing these events were as detailed as those used for religious or state ceremonies. As the afternoon wore on, and the shadows grew longer across the arena sand, the systematic nature of Roman entertainment became most apparent in the cleanup procedures. Specialized crews worked with practiced efficiency to remove bodies, clean blood from the marble surfaces, and prepare the space for the next day's events. They followed detailed protocols that had been refined over decades of experience, ensuring that every trace of the day's violence was methodically erased. The evening cleanup began with the careful removal of all equipment, weapons, and debris from the arena floor. Each item was inspected, cleaned, and returned to its designated storage location according to detailed inventory procedures. Weapons were examined for damage and sorted for repair or replacement, while armor was cleaned and prepared for future use. The systematic nature of these procedures ensured that nothing was lost or overlooked in the transition from one day's entertainment to the next. The sand itself required special attention during the cleanup process. It was carefully raked to remove all traces of blood and debris, then sifted to ensure uniform texture and depth. Areas where the sand had become too saturated with blood were completely replaced with fresh material, while sections that remained clean were simply smoothed and prepared for the next day's events. The Romans had learned through experience that proper sand maintenance was essential to both the safety and visual appeal of arena combat. The marble seating areas underwent their own careful cleaning process, with specialized crews using techniques that had been developed specifically for removing bloodstains and other evidence of the day's violence. Different types of marble required different cleaning approaches, and the crews were trained to identify and treat various stains appropriately. The goal was to restore the arena to its pristine condition, ready for the next day's spectators. The underground chambers where animals and gladiators had waited received the most thorough cleaning of all. These areas were scrubbed, disinfected, and prepared for new occupants. The Romans understood that maintaining sanitary conditions in these spaces was essential to preventing disease and ensuring the health of both animals and fighters. Detailed protocols governed every aspect of this cleaning process, from the types of cleaning agents used to the specific techniques employed by the cleaning crews. As the last traces of the day's entertainment were methodically erased, the arena returned to its state of quiet readiness, the perfectly raked sand gleaming in the fading light, waiting to absorb tomorrow's carefully orchestrated spectacle of violence and drama in the endless cycle of Roman entertainment that had become as predictable and systematic as the empire's roads or aqueducts. How they prepared fish in 14th century France. The morning mist still clung to the Seine when Master Guillaume de Porcy arrived at the fish market in Paris, carrying his leather satchel of specialized knives and a roll of parchment containing the day's orders from noble households throughout the city. The year was 1347, and in the elaborate hierarchy of medieval French cuisine, fish preparation had evolved into something approaching high art, governed by guild regulations so specific that they dictated not just how a pike should be filleted, but the exact angle at which the knife should enter the flesh to preserve what they called the nobility of the meat. Guild records from this period reveal the extraordinary complexity that had developed around what we might consider a simple task. The Corporation des Poissonniers maintained detailed specifications for every aspect of fish handling, from the moment a fish left the water until it appeared on a nobleman's table. These regulations filled hundreds of pages and were updated annually, based on new discoveries about preservation, preparation techniques, and the particular preferences of wealthy clients who could afford to be extraordinarily particular about their meals. The morning began with what the guild called the first examination, a systematic inspection of each fish that went far beyond simply checking for freshness. Master Guillaume would assess not just the clarity of the eyes and the colour of the gills, but dozens of subtle indicators that reveal the fish's suitability for different types of preparation. A carp with slightly cloudy eyes might be perfectly acceptable for a stew destined for a merchant's table, but would be rejected immediately for the delicate poaching required by a duchess who had specifically requested fish as clear as morning water. The tools of the trade were as specialized as those of any other medieval craft. Each type of fish required its own specific knife, and master fish preparers maintained collections of blades that would be familiar to any modern chef, though the medieval versions were often more specialized. The knife used for scaling a pike was different from the one used for filleting it, which was different again from the blade required for the delicate work of removing bones from a trout destined for an invalid's sickbed. But the really fascinating part was how they categorized fish according to elaborate systems that took into account not just species, but size, season, source, and intended preparation method. A salmon caught in spring required different handling than one taken in autumn, not just because of seasonal changes in the fish itself, but because medieval physicians had developed complex theories about how seasonal variations affected the fish's humoral properties, and thus its suitability for different types of people. The guild maintained detailed records of client preferences that read like early market research. Lady Marguerite de Coucy preferred her fish prepared with minimal seasoning because her physician had diagnosed her with an excess of hot humours that required cooling foods. The Bishop of Notre Dame insisted that all fish served at his table be prepared using only wooden implements, believing that metal tools imparted unwholesome qualities to the flesh. The Count of Anjou had developed a particular fondness for fish that had been kept alive in special holding tanks for exactly 3 days after capture, claiming he could taste the difference between fish that had been held for 2 days versus 4. The preparation area in Master Guillaume's workshop was organized with the same methodical precision found in any medieval craft establishment. Different types of fish were processed in separate areas to prevent the mingling of what guild regulations called competing essences. Pike were handled at one station, carp at another, and the more delicate river fish at a third area that was cleaned with special herbs believed to enhance their natural flavors. The washing and cleaning procedures alone followed protocols that had been refined over generations. Each fish was washed in a sequence of 3 different water baths. The first to remove obvious dirt and debris, the second treated with vinegar to eliminate what they believed were harmful influences, and the third infused with herbs selected based on the fish's intended use. A fish destined for a feast might be washed in water, scented with costly imported spices, while one headed for a monastery kitchen received a more austere treatment with local herbs that were believed to promote spiritual contemplation. The guild had developed an elaborate classification system for different types of fish preparation, each with its own specific requirements and procedures. Noble preparation was reserved for the tables of the highest aristocracy and involved techniques so complex that only master craftsmen were permitted to attempt them. Ecclesiastical preparation followed different rules based on religious dietary requirements and the church's complex calendar of fasting and feast days. Merchant preparation balanced quality with cost efficiency, while common preparation focused on feeding large numbers of people with limited resources. The seasonal calendar played a crucial role in determining which preparation methods were appropriate at different times of year. During Lent, when meat was forbidden, fish preparation became even more elaborate, as cooks sought to create dishes that would satisfy wealthy clients accustomed to rich foods. The guild maintained detailed charts showing which fish were appropriate for different holy days, which preparation methods were sanctioned by church authorities, and how various spices and seasonings could be combined to create appropriately penitential yet satisfying meals. Master Guillaume's day typically began with what guild regulations called the morning consideration, a careful review of the day's orders that took into account not just the specific requirements of each client, but the complex logistics of timing different preparation methods to ensure that all dishes would be completed at the appropriate moments. A fish that required 6 hours of slow poaching could not be started at the same time as one that needed only 30 minutes of quick grilling, yet both had to arrive at their destinations at precisely the right temperature and state of readiness. The preservation techniques used in medieval fish preparation were remarkably sophisticated, involving combinations of salt, herbs, and careful temperature control that could keep fish fresh for days or even weeks when necessary. Different preservation methods were used, depending on the fish's destination and the time required for transport. Fish heading to local households might receive only minimal preservation, while those destined for distant castles underwent elaborate processes involving multiple salt cures, herb treatments, and careful wrapping in specially prepared cloths. The guild maintained strict hierarchies among its members, based not just on skill level, but on specialization in different types of preparation. The most prestigious masters were those who had earned the right to prepare fish for royal tables, a privilege that required not just exceptional skill, but also detailed knowledge of court etiquette, religious requirements, and the personal preferences of individual nobles. These masters employed assistants who might spend years learning to properly handle just one type of fish or master a single preparation technique. The economics of fish preparation in medieval France were complex and carefully regulated. Prices were set not just based on the cost of the fish itself, but on the skill required for preparation, the time invested in the process, and the social status of the intended recipient. A simple carp prepared for a merchant's table might cost a few copper coins, while the same fish prepared according to noble standards for an aristocratic feast could cost many times more due to the additional labor, specialized techniques, and premium ingredients required. Guild records show that disputes over preparation standards were surprisingly common, with detailed arbitration procedures for resolving disagreements between clients and fish preparers. These disputes often centered on subtle questions of quality and technique that revealed just how seriously medieval people took their food. A nobleman might refuse to pay for fish that had been scaled in the wrong direction, claiming it produced an inferior texture, while a merchant might demand a reduced price for fish that arrived at the wrong temperature or with seasonings that didn't meet his specifications. The apprenticeship system in fish preparation was as rigorous as in any other medieval guild. New apprentices typically spent their first year learning basic cleaning and washing techniques, gradually advancing to more complex skills like proper filleting and seasoning. The most advanced techniques, such as the elaborate preparations required for royal banquets, were closely guarded secrets passed down only to the most trusted and skilled practitioners. Master Guillaume employed a team of specialized assistants, each responsible for different aspects of the preparation process. One assistant focused exclusively on cleaning and initial preparation. Another specialized in the complex spice mixtures required for different types of dishes, and a third handled the delicate timing required to coordinate multiple preparations simultaneously. This division of labor allowed for both efficiency and the maintenance of consistently high standards across all aspects of the work. The tools and equipment used in medieval fish preparation were often custom-made by specialized craftsmen who understood the unique requirements of the trade. Knives were forged with specific blade angles and edge characteristics for different types of cuts, while specialized vessels were designed for various washing, cooking, and storage procedures. The most successful fish preparers invested considerable sums in high-quality equipment that would last for years and contribute to the consistent quality of their work. The guild maintained detailed records of successful preparation techniques, creating what amounted to an early form of standardized recipes. These records included not just ingredient lists and basic procedures, but detailed notes on timing, temperature control, seasonal variations, and adjustments required for different types of clients. Master craftsmen were expected to contribute to these records by documenting their own innovations and successful experiments. The relationship between fish preparers and their suppliers was governed by complex agreements that specified not just prices and delivery schedules, but detailed quality standards and handling procedures. Fishermen who supplied the guild were required to follow specific protocols for catching, storing, and transporting their catch to ensure that fish arrived in optimal condition. These requirements often meant that suppliers had to invest in specialized equipment and learn new techniques, but the premiums paid for high-quality fish made these investments worthwhile. The seasonal nature of fish availability required careful planning and resource management. Master Guillaume maintained detailed charts showing which species were available at different times of year, how seasonal changes affected quality and preparation requirements, and which preservation techniques were most effective for different types of fish during various seasons. This knowledge was essential for managing inventory, scheduling work, and ensuring that clients received consistent quality throughout the year. The Guild developed elaborate protocols for handling special orders and unusual requests. A nobleman planning an elaborate feast might request fish prepared according to ancient Roman recipes that required extensive research and experimentation to reproduce. A wealthy merchant might desire fish prepared in the style of a distant region, requiring guild members to seek out specialized knowledge and techniques. These special projects often pushed the boundaries of existing knowledge and contributed to the ongoing evolution of preparation techniques. The religious calendar created unique challenges and opportunities for fish preparers. During Lent and other fasting periods, demand for elaborate fish dishes increased dramatically as wealthy clients sought sophisticated alternatives to meat. Guild members developed specialized techniques for creating fish dishes that were both compliant with religious requirements and satisfying to palates accustomed to rich foods. These techniques often involved complex preparations that transformed simple fish into dishes that rivaled the most elaborate meat preparations in complexity and appeal. Master Guillaume's workshop included specialized storage areas designed to maintain optimal conditions for different types of fish and preparation ingredients. Fresh fish were kept in cool, well-ventilated areas with access to clean water, while preserved fish were stored in dry spaces, protected from temperature fluctuations. Spices and seasonings required their own specialized storage conditions, with careful attention paid to protecting them from moisture, light, and contamination that could affect their potency and flavor. The Guild maintained relationships with various other craft organizations whose work intersected with fish preparation. Spice merchants provided the costly seasonings required for elaborate preparations, while pottery makers created specialized vessels designed specifically for fish cookery. Cloth merchants supplied the fine fabrics used for wrapping and presenting finished dishes, while metal workers crafted the specialized tools and equipment that made complex preparations possible. As the afternoon progressed and the day's orders neared completion, Master Guillaume would begin the careful process of final presentation and delivery preparation. Each dish was wrapped and packaged according to specific protocols designed to maintain temperature, prevent contamination, and ensure that the food arrived at its destination in perfect condition. The packaging materials themselves were selected based on the type of preparation and the distance to be traveled, with different techniques used for local delivery versus longer journeys. The evening cleanup in Master Guillaume's workshop followed procedures that had been refined over years of experience. All surfaces were scrubbed with specific combinations of salt and herbs believed to eliminate unwholesome influences, while tools were cleaned, sharpened, and properly stored to ensure they would be ready for the next day's work. Waste materials were disposed of according to guild regulations and city ordinances, with organic waste often sold to farmers for fertilizer and other materials recycled where possible. The end of each working day brought a quiet period of preparation for the following day's tasks. Master Guillaume would review the next day's orders, check inventory levels, and ensure that all necessary ingredients and materials were properly prepared and ready for use. This careful preparation was essential to maintaining the smooth operation of the workshop and ensuring that all orders could be completed to the guild's exacting standards. The guild's training manuals, painstakingly copied by hand and jealously guarded, contained detailed illustrations showing the proper hand positions for different types of cuts. These drawings, accompanied by precise written instructions, demonstrated how the angle of the knife should change based on the species of fish, the intended preparation method, and even the time of year. A pike filleted in winter required a slightly different technique than one prepared in summer, because seasonal changes in the fish's flesh density affected how the knife should move through the meat. The most advanced techniques were reserved for what the guild called presentation preparations, dishes intended not just to nourish, but to impress through their visual appeal and technical sophistication. These preparations often involved reconstructing fish after filleting them, using carefully crafted supports and strategic placement of garnishes to create the illusion that the fish was still whole while making the meat easily accessible to diners. The techniques required for these presentations were closely guarded secrets, passed down only through direct apprenticeship with master craftsmen. Master Guillaume maintained detailed client files that recorded not just current preferences, but historical patterns of taste changes, seasonal variations in orders, and even notes about family celebrations and religious observances that might affect future needs. These records helped him anticipate demand, plan inventory, and suggest new preparations that might appeal to specific clients. A family that had traditionally ordered simple preparations during Lent might be introduced to more elaborate techniques as their wealth increased or their taste became more sophisticated. The guild had developed specialized techniques for different cooking methods that would be used after the fish left the preparation workshop. Fish destined for roasting required different cutting and seasoning approaches than those intended for poaching or stewing. The preparers needed to understand not just their own techniques, but the cooking methods that would follow, ensuring that their work would complement rather than conflict with the final preparation steps. The preservation of fish during transport was handled through carefully developed systems that took into account distance, weather conditions, and the specific requirements of different types of preparations. Fresh fish heading to nearby locations might be wrapped simply in clean cloths, moistened with herb-infused water, while fish travelling longer distances underwent elaborate packing procedures involving layers of salt, herbs, and specially prepared wrappings designed to maintain optimal conditions throughout the journey. The economics of the fish preparation trade were complicated by the highly variable nature of supply and demand. A sudden shortage of a particular species might require master preparers to quickly adapt their techniques to work with substitute fish, while maintaining the quality and presentation standards expected by wealthy clients. Guild members developed repertoires of backup techniques and alternative approaches that could be deployed when primary ingredients became unavailable or prohibitively expensive. The relationship between fish preparers and the cooks, who would complete the dishes, was governed by detailed protocols that ensured smooth coordination between different stages of food preparation. Preparers provided specific instructions for handling their work, including recommended cooking times, temperature guidelines, and suggestions for final seasoning adjustments. These instructions were often written on small pieces of parchment attached to each package, creating an early form of recipe communication between kitchen professionals. Seasonal celebrations and religious festivals created periods of intense activity in fish preparation workshops. During major feast days, master preparers might work around the clock to meet demand for elaborate dishes from wealthy households hosting large gatherings. These periods required careful advance planning, additional temporary staff, and coordination with suppliers to ensure adequate supplies of both fish and specialty ingredients. The Guild maintained quality control systems that included regular inspections of member workshops, standardized testing of preparation techniques, and customer feedback collection. Masters who consistently failed to meet Guild standards faced penalties ranging from fines to temporary suspension of Guild privileges. The most serious violations could result in permanent expulsion from the Guild, effectively ending a craftsman's career in professional fish preparation. Advanced practitioners developed signature techniques that became associated with their individual workshops. Master Guillaume was known throughout Paris for his particular method of preparing carp that involved a specific sequence of salt treatments and herb applications that produced what clients described as unusually tender and flavorful results. These signature techniques became valuable business assets that could attract wealthy clients and command premium prices. The tool maintenance requirements in fish preparation were particularly demanding due to the corrosive effects of salt water and fish oils on metal implements. Master craftsmen developed elaborate cleaning and preservation routines for their knives and other tools, using combinations of salt, vinegar, and specialized oils to prevent rust and maintain sharp edges. The most valuable tools were stored in specially designed cases that protected them from moisture and temperature fluctuations. The apprenticeship process included not just technical training, but education in client relations, business practices, and guild regulations. Apprentices learned to interact appropriately with servants from noble households, understand the subtle social cues that indicated client satisfaction or dissatisfaction, and handle the complex financial arrangements that often accompanied large orders from wealthy patrons. The Guild's record-keeping systems included detailed documentation of successful innovations and failed experiments. These records help prevent the repetition of costly mistakes while preserving knowledge of effective techniques for future generations. Master craftsmen were expected to contribute to these records by documenting their own discoveries and sharing knowledge that might benefit other guild members. The storage and aging of certain types of fish preparations required specialized facilities and techniques. Some preservation methods involved controlled aging processes that could take weeks or even months to complete, requiring dedicated storage spaces with carefully maintained temperature and humidity conditions. These long-term preparations commanded premium prices, but required significant capital investment and expertise to execute successfully. The Guild developed sophisticated methods for predicting and managing seasonal variations in fish quality and availability. Master preparers maintained detailed charts, tracking historical patterns of supply and demand, enabling them to anticipate shortages, plan inventory purchases, and adjust their preparation schedules to optimize both quality and profitability. This knowledge was particularly valuable during the transition periods between seasons when fish quality and availability could change rapidly. Professional relationships with fishermen and fish merchants were carefully cultivated and maintained through formal agreements that specified quality standards, delivery schedules, and payment terms. The most successful preparers developed exclusive relationships with reliable suppliers who understood their specific requirements and could provide consistent quality fish throughout the year. These relationships often involved advance payments and guaranteed purchase agreements that benefited both parties. The Guild maintained detailed records of regional and international variations in fish preparation techniques, creating an early form of culinary exchange network. Masters who travelled or received training in other regions were expected to share their knowledge with Guild colleagues, contributing to the ongoing evolution of French fish preparation techniques. This exchange of information helped maintain France's reputation for culinary excellence and innovation. The training of specialized assistants required different approaches for different roles within the workshop. Assistants responsible for initial cleaning and preparation needed to develop speed and consistency in basic techniques, while those handling seasoning and final presentation required more subtle skills related to flavor balance and visual appeal. The division of labor allowed workshops to handle larger volumes while maintaining consistent quality across all aspects of the work. Master Guillaume's evening routine included a careful inventory of remaining supplies, assessment of equipment condition, and planning for the next day's work. He would review orders scheduled for completion, check the condition of fish in storage, and ensure that all necessary ingredients and materials were properly prepared. This systematic approach to daily planning was essential to maintaining the smooth operation of a busy workshop. The Guild's relationship with church authorities was particularly important due to the religious significance of fish in medieval Christian culture. Guild members needed to understand complex dietary regulations related to fasting periods, religious festivals, and clerical dining customs. They often worked closely with monastery kitchens and episcopal households, requiring specialized knowledge of religious dietary requirements and ecclesiastical etiquette. The development of new preparation techniques was a continuous process driven by changing client preferences, seasonal variations in fish quality, and the availability of new ingredients from expanding trade networks. Master craftsmen experimented with new combinations of spices, alternative preservation methods, and innovative presentation techniques, contributing to the ongoing evolution of French culinary traditions. The physical demands of fish preparation work required craftsmen to develop specific techniques for managing fatigue and preventing injury. The repetitive motions involved in filleting and cleaning fish could cause strain injuries, while the constant handling of sharp knives required constant attention to safety. Experienced masters developed efficient working methods that minimized physical stress while maintaining high productivity and quality standards. The Guild's quality assurance procedures included regular taste testing of prepared fish to ensure that preparation techniques were producing consistently excellent results. These tests were conducted by experienced masters who could detect subtle variations in flavor, texture, and appearance that might indicate problems with technique or ingredients. The feedback from these tests was used to make adjustments to preparation methods and maintain the Guild's reputation for excellence. As twilight settled over the workshop, Master Guillaume would complete his final tasks of the day, carefully cleaning and storing his tools, securing any remaining inventory, and preparing the workspace for the next day's activities. The quiet rhythms of closing procedures had been refined over years of practice, each motion efficient and purposeful, ensuring that nothing was forgotten or overlooked in the transition from one working day to the next. The last task of each evening was the careful updating of records, documenting the day's production, noting any issues or observations about fish quality or preparation techniques, and recording client feedback that might influence future work. These records formed a continuous chronicle of the workshop's activities and served as a valuable resource for planning and problem solving. The gentle sounds of the workshop settling into evening quiet were familiar and comforting. The soft whisper of cloth coverings being placed over work surfaces, the quiet click of knife handles being placed in their proper storage positions, the rustle of parchment as the day's records were filed away with systematic care, all part of the careful rhythm that had governed French fish preparation for generations, each day ending as it began, with methodical attention to every detail that separated mere food preparation from the sophisticated craft that had elevated fish cookery to an art form worthy of the most discriminating palates in medieval Europe. How a monastic dormitory stayed quiet all night. The bell tower of Cluny Abbey struck Compline as Brother Thomas began his nightly round through the dormitory, his soft leather shoes making no sound on the worn stone floors, as he checked that each of the 43 beds was properly prepared for the night's observance of the Great Silence. In his hands he carried a small wooden tablet covered in wax, onto which he would note any irregularities that might disturb the profound quiet that was supposed to descend upon the monastery from sunset until the bell rang for lards before dawn. The maintenance of absolute silence in a medieval monastery dormitory was not simply a matter of asking 43 men to keep quiet for 8 hours. It required an elaborate system of procedures, protocols, and physical arrangements that had been refined over centuries of monastic experience. Every aspect of the dormitory's design, from the spacing of the beds to the type of hinges used on storage chests, had been carefully considered to minimize the possibility of unwanted noise during the sacred hours of night. The beds themselves were arranged according to a precise formula that took into account not just the efficient use of space, but the acoustic properties of the long stone chamber. Each bed was positioned to maximize the distance between sleepers who were known to be restless, while placing the heaviest sleepers near those who might be disturbed by small sounds. Brother Thomas maintained detailed charts showing which monks snored, which ones talked in their sleep, and which ones were prone to nightmares that might cause them to cry out unexpectedly. The rule of Saint Benedict specified that monks should sleep fully clothed, ready to rise immediately for the night office of matins, but the practical implementation of this requirement had evolved into a complex system of specialized sleeping garments. The regular woolen habit was considered too rough and bulky for comfortable sleep, so the monastery maintained a complete secondary wardrobe of softer sleeping robes that would not rustle when the wearer turned over or shifted position during the night. Each monk's sleeping area included a carefully curated collection of items designed to minimize the need for movement during the silent hours. A small wooden cup for water was positioned within easy reach, cushioned with cloth to prevent any sound if accidentally knocked over. Personal prayer books were secured with soft leather straps to prevent pages from fluttering if a window were open during the night. Even the chamber pots were lined with thick cloth to muffle any sounds that might result from their necessary use. The monastery had developed an elaborate system of hand signals that allowed essential communication during the hours of silence. These signals covered everything from requests for medical attention to reports of equipment problems that might require immediate repair. Brother Thomas and the other night supervisors were fluent in this silent language, able to conduct complex conversations using only carefully prescribed gestures that had been standardized across the entire Cluniac order. The physical structure of the dormitory itself had been designed with acoustic considerations paramount. The ceiling height was calculated to prevent sound from carrying too effectively between different areas of the room, while the placement of supporting pillars created natural sound barriers that helped contain any unavoidable noise within small sections. The windows were fitted with specially designed shutters that could be adjusted to provide ventilation without creating drafts that might cause doors to creak or cloth hangings to flutter. Brother Thomas carried with him a collection of specialized tools for maintaining dormitory quiet. His wooden tablet and stylus allowed him to record observations silently. A small pot of oil could be applied immediately to any hinges that began to squeak, Soft cloth strips could be used to pad anything that might bang against something else. Even his clothing had been modified with extra padding in areas that might rub together as he moved, ensuring that his supervisory rounds created no sound that might disturb the sleeping monks. The monastery's daily schedule was carefully structured to minimize the likelihood of disruptions during the silent hours. The evening meal was timed to conclude well before compline, allowing sufficient time for digestion to prevent stomach rumbling during the night. The final opportunity for necessary conversation occurred during a brief period after Vespers, when monks could address any practical concerns that might otherwise require communication during the forbidden hours. The heating of the dormitory during cold months required special consideration to maintain silence. Traditional fireplaces were avoided because of the crackling and popping sounds they produced. Instead, the monastery employed a system of heated stones that were warmed in the kitchen fires during the day, then carefully wrapped in thick cloth and placed in strategic locations around the dormitory. These stones provided gentle, silent warmth that gradually dissipated throughout the night without creating any disturbing sounds. Each monk's personal possessions were subject to strict regulations designed to prevent noise. Books had to be bound in soft leather rather than harder materials that might slap against surfaces. Writing implements were stored in padded containers. Even rosary beads were made from specially selected materials that would not click against each other during prayer. The monastery maintained workshops where craftsmen specialized in creating silent versions of common religious objects. The selection and training of monks for dormitory residents involved careful evaluation of their sleeping habits and noise-making tendencies. Candidates were observed during trial periods to assess their compatibility with the demanding requirements of communal silent sleep. Those who proved unable to maintain the necessary quiet were often assigned to other duties or housed in separate quarters where their individual quirks would not disturb the community's observance. Brother Thomas had developed techniques for moving through the dormitory that were as refined as those of any professional dancer. He knew which floorboards might creak under pressure and had memorized paths that avoided them entirely. His movements followed carefully choreographed routes that minimized the time spent near sleeping monks, while ensuring complete coverage of his supervisory responsibilities. Each step was planned and executed with the precision of a ritual performance. The monastery maintained detailed records of sleep-related incidents and their causes, creating what amounted to an early form of acoustic engineering documentation. These records helped identify recurring problems and develop solutions that could be implemented to prevent future disruptions. A door that squeaked only during certain weather conditions might be noted and scheduled for preventive maintenance. A monk who consistently had difficulty sleeping quietly might be moved to a different location or provided with additional training in silent movement techniques. The night clothing worn by the monks was subject to regulations as detailed as those governing their daytime habits. The fabric had to be of sufficient quality to remain comfortable throughout the night, without requiring adjustment, but not so fine that it would rustle with movement. The cut and fit was standardized to prevent bunching or binding that might cause a sleeper to shift position frequently. Even the thread used for sewing was selected based on its acoustic properties. The community's approach to dealing with unavoidable sounds during the night had evolved into a sophisticated system of damage control. If a monk accidentally created a disturbance, there were established protocols for minimizing its impact and preventing it from escalating into a larger disruption. Other monks were trained to remain still and quiet, even when awakened, rather than risk creating additional noise through their reactions to the original disturbance. Medical emergencies during the silent hours required special handling to balance the need for assistance with the preservation of quiet. The monastery maintained a supply of herbal remedies that could be administered silently, along with trained brothers who could provide basic medical care using techniques that minimized noise and disturbance. More serious medical situations had predetermined procedures that allowed for necessary communication while maintaining as much quiet as possible. The psychological aspects of maintaining silence in a communal sleeping environment were as important as the physical arrangements. Monks underwent specific training in what the community called silent sleep discipline, learning techniques for calming their minds and bodies to prevent the restlessness that might lead to noise-making. These techniques included breathing exercises, prayer methods, and mental disciplines that promoted peaceful, quiet rest. Brother Thomas's supervisory duties included not just monitoring for actual disturbances, but watching for signs that problems might develop. A monk who appeared restless might be gently assisted with positioning or provided with additional comfort measures before his restlessness could escalate into noise. The goal was prevention rather than correction, maintaining the sacred silence through careful attention to developing situations rather than reactive responses to problems after they occurred. The seasonal variations in dormitory management required constant adjustment of procedures and equipment. Summer heat might necessitate additional ventilation measures that had to be implemented without creating noise, while winter cold required heating solutions that maintained warmth without disturbing sounds. The monastery maintained detailed seasonal protocols that specified exactly how dormitory conditions should be managed throughout the year. The community's commitment to maintaining dormitory silence extended to their relationships with the outside world. Visitors to the monastery were carefully briefed on the requirements for quiet during the night hours, and guest accommodations were positioned to minimize any potential impact on the monks' dormitory. Trade activities and other external business were scheduled to conclude well before the onset of the silent period. The training of new monks in dormitory behavior began long before they were permitted to sleep in the communal space. Candidates spent months learning the complex requirements and practicing the necessary skills in supervised settings. They had to demonstrate mastery of silent movement, proper care of noise-sensitive equipment, and the discipline required to maintain absolute quiet, even when faced with uncomfortable or unusual situations. Brother Thomas maintained a mental catalogue of every potential source of noise in the dormitory and the specific techniques required to address each one. He knew which beds were prone to creaking and the exact method for adjusting them silently. He understood the acoustic properties of different types of fabric and could predict how various materials would behave under different humidity conditions. His expertise represented decades of accumulated knowledge about the practical requirements of maintaining perfect silence in a shared living space. The monastery's approach to dormitory silence was based on the understanding that true quiet required more than just the absence of obvious noise. It demanded the creation of an environment where even the subtle sounds of breathing, heartbeats, and gentle movement combined to form what they called the music of holy rest. Achieving this required attention to details so fine that they bordered on the mystical, transforming the practical necessity of quiet sleep into a form of communal prayer. The community's rule required that any monk who accidentally disturbed a dormitory silence perform specific acts of penance the following day. These penances were designed not as punishment, but as reminders of the spiritual significance of maintaining the sacred quiet. They often involved additional periods of personal silence, extra prayer duties, or service activities that helped maintain the physical conditions necessary for dormitory tranquility. As Brother Thomas completed his evening rounds, he would pause at the center of the dormitory to listen carefully to the sounds of the community settling into the great silence. His trained ear could detect the subtle signs that indicated whether the night would pass peacefully or might require intervention. The gentle rhythm of 43 men breathing in harmony, the soft whisper of fabric as they found comfortable positions, the barely audible prayers whispered as they composed themselves for sleep. All of these combined to create what the community considered one of the most profound expressions of their shared spiritual life. The final task of each evening was the symbolic lighting of the single candle that would burn throughout the night in the dormitory's small shrine. This candle served both practical and spiritual purposes, providing just enough light for emergency navigation while representing the community's continuous prayer that stretched from evening until dawn. The lighting ceremony was conducted in complete silence, using gestures and movements that had been refined into a form of wordless liturgy. The monastery's reputation for maintaining perfect dormitory silence had spread throughout the medieval church, attracting visitors who wanted to experience what chroniclers described as the most profound quiet to be found in Christian Europe. This reputation brought both honor and responsibility, requiring the community to maintain standards that were among the highest in the monastic world. The pressure to preserve this reputation added another layer of motivation to the already demanding requirements of the Great Silence. Brother Thomas would conclude his duties by taking his own place in the dormitory, settling into his narrow bed with the same careful attention to silence that he had required of others throughout the evening. His own rest was often lighter than that of other monks, as his responsibilities continued even during sleep. He remained alert to any sounds that might require his attention, ready to address problems without disturbing the sacred quiet that surrounded the sleeping community. The gradual deepening of silence as the monastery settled into night followed a predictable pattern that Brother Thomas had observed thousands of times. First came the rustling of final adjustments as monks found their sleeping positions. Then the gentle sounds of settling that indicated the community was preparing for rest, followed by the gradual establishment of the rhythmic breathing that marked the beginning of true sleep. This progression from the small sounds of preparation to the profound quiet of deep night was considered one of the most beautiful aspects of monastic life. The hours between compline and matins were divided into periods that required different types of attention from the night supervisors. The early hours after bedtime required vigilance for problems related to settling in and adjusting to the quiet. The middle hours were usually the most peaceful, with deep sleep minimizing the likelihood of disturbances. The pre-dawn hours brought their own challenges, as some monks began to stir naturally in preparation for the morning office, requiring careful management to prevent premature awakening of the entire community. Brother Thomas maintained detailed knowledge of each monk's individual sleep patterns and requirements. He knew who was likely to have difficulty falling asleep and might benefit from additional comfort measures. He understood which monks were heavy sleepers who could be relied upon not to disturb others, and which ones were light sleepers who might be awakened by the smallest sounds. This intimate knowledge of the community's sleep characteristics was essential to maintaining the delicate balance required for successful dormitory silence. The spiritual dimensions of dormitory silence extended far beyond mere practical considerations. The community understood their shared quiet as a form of prayer in itself, a collective offering of peace that continued throughout the night, even as individual consciousness faded into sleep. This understanding transformed the practical challenges of maintaining silence into opportunities for spiritual growth and communal devotion. As the night deepened and the great silence settled completely over the dormitory, Brother Thomas would make his final circuit of the long stone chamber, his movements now so practiced and silent that they seemed more like prayer than supervision. The sight of 43 men sleeping peacefully in perfect quiet represented the culmination of centuries of monastic wisdom about how human beings could live together in harmony. Each individual was surrendered to the greater good of communal peace. The monastery's approach to managing individual sleep disturbances had evolved into a sophisticated system of preventive and corrective measures. Each monk underwent regular assessment of their sleep habits, with detailed records maintained of any recurring issues that might affect dormitory silence. Brothers who consistently experienced nightmares were provided with special prayer disciplines designed to calm their minds before sleep. Those prone to restless movement were given additional instruction in sleep positioning techniques that minimized the likelihood of noise-producing motion during the night. The physical environment of the dormitory was constantly adjusted based on seasonal and weather conditions. Brother Thomas maintained detailed charts showing how temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure affected different aspects of dormitory acoustics. During periods of high humidity, wooden surfaces might expand and become more prone to creaking, requiring preemptive application of oil to hinges and joints. Cold weather could cause metal fixtures to contract, creating gaps that might allow whistling winds or other unwanted sounds to penetrate the sleeping area. The community had developed specialized techniques for handling the arrival of new monks in the dormitory without disrupting the established patterns of silence. New arrivals underwent intensive training in what the monastery called silent integration, learning not just the rules and procedures, but the subtle social dynamics that governed how 43 men could share a living space in complete quiet. This training included practice sessions where candidates had to demonstrate their ability to perform all necessary nighttime activities without creating any detectable sound. The monastery's medical staff had developed specialized knowledge about sleep-related health issues and their impact on community silence. They maintained detailed records of how various ailments affected individual monks' ability to maintain quiet during sleep, and had developed treatment protocols specifically designed to address problems that might cause noise disturbances. Remedies for snoring, coughing, and other involuntary sounds were prepared using ingredients selected not just for their medical effectiveness, but for their compatibility with the spiritual discipline of silence. Brother Thomas had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated developing problems before they could manifest as actual noise disturbances. A monk who appeared to be entering a period of restless sleep might be gently attended to with minor adjustments to bedding or positioning that could prevent the restlessness from escalating into noise. The skill required for this type of preventive intervention was considered one of the highest accomplishments in monastic dormitory management. The community's understanding of silence extended beyond mere absence of sound to encompass what they called positive quiet, an active spiritual discipline that required conscious participation from every member of the dormitory. This concept influenced every aspect of their nighttime routine, from the way they prepared for sleep to the mental disciplines they employed to maintain peaceful rest. The goal was not simply to avoid making noise, but to contribute actively to the creation of an environment that promoted deep spiritual and physical rest for the entire community. The seasonal liturgical calendar created additional complexities in dormitory management. During Advent and Lent, the community observed even stricter silence disciplines that required modifications to normal dormitory procedures. Special feast days might involve altered sleep schedules that required careful coordination to maintain silence while accommodating the changed routine. The monastery maintained detailed protocols for managing these variations while preserving the essential character of the Great Silence. The training of night supervisors like Brother Thomas required years of specialized education in what the community called the sciences of holy quiet. This training included not just practical knowledge of acoustic management and sleep supervision, but deep study of the theological and spiritual dimensions of communal silence. Supervisors were expected to understand how their work contributed to the broader spiritual life of the community, and to approach their duties as a form of prayer and service. The monastery's relationships with neighboring communities were influenced by their commitment to maintaining dormitory silence. The timing of deliveries, the scheduling of construction projects, and even the routes used by travelers were coordinated to minimize any external noise that might penetrate the dormitory during the sacred hours. Local farmers and merchants had learned to adjust their activities to respect the monastery's schedule, creating a buffer zone of quiet that extended beyond the monastery walls. The community had developed elaborate protocols for handling emergencies that might occur during the silent hours. Fire, medical crisis, or security threats required immediate response. But even these urgent situations were managed using predetermined procedures designed to minimize disruption to the Great Silence. Emergency communication systems used visual signals and standardized gestures rather than spoken words, and response procedures emphasized swift, silent action rather than vocal coordination. Brother Thomas maintained specialized equipment designed specifically for nighttime dormitory supervision. His collection included various types of soft brushes for cleaning that would not create scratching sounds, oils and lubricants for maintaining hinges and moving parts, padding materials for cushioning potential noise sources, and even specialized tools for making emergency repairs that might be required during the night hours. Each item had been selected or modified to function silently while performing its intended task. The psychological preparation for dormitory silence began during each monk's initial formation and continued throughout their monastic life. The community had developed specific meditation techniques that helped individuals transition from the mental activity of daytime into the peaceful mindset required for silent sleep. These techniques included breathing exercises, prayer formulas, and mental disciplines that gradually quieted the mind and prepared it for rest that would not disturb others. The monastery's approach to bedding and sleeping surfaces had been refined through generations of experience with the acoustic requirements of communal rest. Mattresses were filled with materials selected for their silence as well as comfort, straw that had been specially processed to eliminate rustling, wool that had been prepared to minimize shifting sounds, and fabric covers that would not whisper against each other when the sleeper moved. Even the bed frames were constructed using joinery techniques that prevented creaking and shifting. The community's understanding of the spiritual significance of shared silence influenced every aspect of their dormitory life. They saw their ability to sleep peacefully together as a reflection of their success in achieving true Christian community, where individual desires and habits were subordinated to the common good. This understanding motivated monks to accept the sometimes difficult discipline required to maintain perfect quiet, viewing their sacrifices as contributions to the spiritual welfare of their brothers. Brother Thomas had developed an intimate knowledge of the dormitory's acoustic properties that enabled him to predict and prevent problems before they occurred. He understood how changes in weather affected the behavior of wood and metal components, how different levels of occupancy influenced sound transmission, and how the time of year affected everything from the flexibility of hinges to the resonance of the stone walls. This knowledge allowed him to make preemptive adjustments that maintained optimal conditions for silence throughout the changing seasons. The monastery maintained detailed architectural records showing how the dormitory's design had evolved over time to better support the requirements of communal silence. Modifications included the addition of sound dampening materials, adjustments to window placement and size, and refinements to the ventilation system that provided fresh air without creating noise. These improvements were implemented gradually, with each change carefully tested to ensure it enhanced rather than compromised the acoustic environment. The community's daily schedule was designed to promote the physical and mental conditions most conducive to quiet sleep. The timing of meals, the intensity of work activities, and even the topics permitted in conversation during the day were all considered in terms of their potential impact on nighttime rest. Activities that might leave monks mentally or physically agitated were scheduled for early in the day, allowing time for the restoration of calm before the evening's onset of silence. The monastery's reputation for maintaining perfect dormitory silence had attracted scholarly attention from other religious communities seeking to improve their own practices. Brother Thomas and other experienced supervisors regularly received visitors who wanted to learn their techniques and observe their procedures. These exchanges helped spread refined methods of communal silence management throughout the broader monastic world, while also bringing new ideas and innovations back to the community. The training of monks in silent movement had evolved into what amounted to a specialized form of physical education. New members learned specific techniques for walking, sitting, lying down, and performing necessary tasks without creating noise. This training included exercises designed to increase body awareness and control, enabling monks to move with precision even in the darkness of the dormitory. The most accomplished practitioners could navigate the entire length of the dormitory and perform complex tasks without creating any detectable sound. The community had developed sophisticated methods for maintaining the quality of silence during periods when the dormitory's population fluctuated. Visiting monks, temporary residents, and candidates undergoing evaluation required special accommodation and supervision to ensure they could integrate into the dormitory's acoustic discipline without disrupting established patterns. These situations required flexible application of standard procedures while maintaining the essential requirements of the Great Silence. Brother Thomas understood that his role extended beyond mere supervision to encompass what the community called guardianship of sacred quiet. This responsibility involved not just preventing noise and managing disturbances, but actively fostering the spiritual atmosphere that made deep, peaceful rest possible for the entire community. His presence in the dormitory was seen as a form of prayer in action, a visible sign of the community's commitment to creating conditions where souls could rest in divine peace. The monastery's approach to handling violations of dormitory silence emphasized restoration rather than punishment. Monks who accidentally created disturbances were guided through processes designed to help them understand the impact of their actions and develop better techniques for maintaining quiet. The goal was to strengthen the individual's commitment to communal silence while preserving the charitable relationships that were fundamental to monastic community life. The physical positioning of monks within the dormitory was managed according to complex criteria that took into account not just individual sleep characteristics, but the social and spiritual dynamics of community life. Brothers who were particularly skilled at maintaining silence might be positioned near those who struggled with the discipline, providing examples and subtle assistance. Monks with complementary prayer schedules might be placed near each other to facilitate the quiet coordination required for personal devotions during the night hours. The community maintained detailed records of successful innovations and improvements in dormitory silence management. These records served as a repository of accumulated wisdom that could be consulted when facing new challenges or training new supervisors. The documentation included not just technical procedures, but insights into the spiritual and psychological aspects of maintaining communal quiet, creating a comprehensive guide to what the monastery considered one of the highest achievements of monastic life. As the deepest hours of night settled over the dormitory, Brother Thomas would position himself at the center of the long chamber, listening to the subtle symphony of communal rest that represented the fulfillment of the day's spiritual work. The gentle rhythm of synchronized breathing, the occasional soft whisper of fabric as a sleeper adjusted position, the barely audible murmur of personal prayers continuing even in sleep, all combined to create what the community understood as a form of continuous worship that bridged the conscious hours of formal prayer with the unconscious hours of divine rest. The gradual transition from the active supervision of early night to the watchful meditation of the deepest hours required its own discipline and spiritual preparation. Brother Thomas had learned to enter a state of alert contemplation that allowed him to remain aware of the dormitory's condition while simultaneously engaging in the personal prayer that was expected to continue throughout the night. This dual consciousness of practical responsibility and spiritual devotion was considered one of the most challenging aspects of dormitory supervision. The monastery's understanding of sleep as a form of prayer influenced even the most practical aspects of dormitory management. The arrangement of beds, the quality of bedding, and the regulation of temperature and ventilation were all approached as ways of honoring the divine presence that was believed to dwell among the sleeping community. This theological understanding transformed routine maintenance tasks into acts of devotion and elevated the practical work of dormitory supervision to the level of liturgical service. The community's commitment to maintaining dormitory silence extended to their preparation for death and their care of the dying. Special protocols existed for providing comfort and spiritual assistance to seriously ill monks without disrupting the great silence. These procedures included silent methods of administering last rites, techniques for providing medical care without creating noise, and ways of honoring deceased community members while preserving the acoustic discipline that had governed their shared life. Brother Thomas had developed the ability to distinguish between different types of sounds and assess their significance for dormitory management. He could identify the difference between the natural sounds of peaceful sleep and the subtle signs that might indicate developing problems. His trained ear could detect changes in breathing patterns that might signal illness, shifts in movement that might indicate discomfort, or variations in the overall acoustic environment that might require attention. The monastery's seasonal celebrations were carefully planned to accommodate the requirements of dormitory silence. Special feast days that involved altered schedules or unusual activities required advanced preparation to ensure that the excitement and disruption of celebration would not compromise the community's ability to maintain their usual standard of nighttime quiet. These occasions demanded skillful coordination between the demands of liturgical observance and the practical requirements of communal rest. As dawn approached and the time for lards drew near, Brother Thomas would begin the careful process of preparing for the community's awakening. This transition from the great silence to the active prayer of morning required its own specialized techniques, ensuring that the shift from sleep to worship occurred smoothly and reverently. The awakening process was managed to maintain the spiritual atmosphere established during the night, while gradually preparing the community for the day's activities. The final moments before the dawn bell were often the most profound, as the accumulated quiet of the entire night reached its deepest point before giving way to the communal prayer that would begin another day. Brother Thomas would stand in silent gratitude for the gift of peaceful rest that had been granted to the community, understanding his role in maintaining that peace as a form of stewardship over one of the most precious aspects of monastic life, the ability of human beings to rest together in perfect harmony, their individual wills surrendered to the greater good of shared silence. How they folded tunics in ancient Rome. The slaves in charge of the imperial laundry had to memorize 17 different folding patterns, each with its own specific occasion and social meaning. Get it wrong, and you might accidentally suggest that a senator's wife was available for marriage negotiations, or worse, imply that a consul had recently suffered a business failure. Because in ancient Rome, even the way your clothes were folded could start a political scandal. It began each morning in the vast underground chambers beneath the Palatine Hill, where the vestiarii, the imperial clothing attendants, would gather around marble tables that had been carved specifically for the art of fabric arrangement. The tables themselves were engineering marvels, with subtle grooves and raised edges that guided the precise angles required for each fold. Different tables for different garments, naturally, because mixing a senator's toga preparation surface with a slave's tunic station would have been unthinkable. The head vestiarius, usually a freedman who had spent decades learning the intricate social language of Roman dress, would arrive before dawn to inspect the previous day's work. He carried a bronze measuring rod, exactly 1 Roman foot in length, which he would use to verify that each fold met the exacting standards that had been codified during the reign of Augustus. These weren't arbitrary rules. They had emerged from a complex understanding of how fabric should behave in Roman society, where your clothing communicated your status, your availability, your political allegiances, and even your recent financial transactions. The tunics themselves told stories before they were even folded. The finest ones, worn by the wealthy, were made from silk that had travelled the entire length of the Silk Road, dyed with colours that cost more than most Romans earned in a year. Tyrian purple, extracted from thousands of murex shells, was so expensive that wearing it in the wrong shade could bankrupt a family. The dye had to be applied in precise gradations, and the resulting fabric required handling techniques that had been passed down through generations of specialized craftsmen. But it was the folding that transformed these expensive textiles into social statements. The basic tunic fold, used for everyday wear by citizens, began with the garment laid perfectly flat, sleeves extended at precise right angles. The vestiarius would then perform what was called the placatura civilis, the citizen's fold. First, the right sleeve was brought across the chest area of the tunic, creating a diagonal line that would be invisible when worn, but would affect how the fabric hung on the body. The left sleeve followed, but not symmetrically. It was positioned exactly 3 finger widths higher than the right, creating a subtle asymmetry that somehow made the entire garment hang with more dignity. The process required extraordinary precision. Roman clothing was designed to drape in specific ways, and any deviation in the folding would be immediately visible to anyone who understood the social codes. A tunic folded with the left sleeve positioned too low would suggest that the wearer was inexperienced in matters of protocol, acceptable for a young citizen learning his place in society, but potentially humiliating for an established businessman or government official. For senators and other high-ranking officials, the folding became even more complex. The plicatura senatorialis involved 17 separate steps, each with multiple sub-variations depending on the specific occasion. A tunic being prepared for a Senate meeting was folded differently than one intended for a religious ceremony, which was different again from one meant for a private dinner party. The differences were subtle, perhaps the angle at which the hem was positioned or the specific way the neckline area was arranged, but they were crucial for maintaining the elaborate social hierarchies that kept Roman society functioning. The most complex folding technique was reserved for the emperor's tunics. The placatura imperialis was so intricate that only 3 people in the entire empire were authorized to perform it. These master folders had undergone years of training, not just in the physical techniques, but in understanding the political implications of every crease. The emperor's tunic fold had to communicate absolute authority while remaining modest enough to avoid accusations of excessive luxury. It was a balance that required not just skill but genuine artistic vision. What made this even more remarkable was that the folding patterns changed regularly. New ones were introduced to mark important political events, military victories, or religious festivals. When Rome conquered a new territory, the imperial vestiari would sometimes incorporate folding elements that subtly referenced the defeated enemy's traditional clothing styles. a way of demonstrating Rome's cultural dominance while showing respect for worthy opponents. These new patterns would then filter down through Roman society, with wealthy citizens adopting simplified versions to show their awareness of current events. The morning routine in the imperial laundry began with the junior slaves sorting the previous day's tunics according to their owner's social rank and the day's scheduled activities. Each tunic was inspected for stains, wear patterns, and any damage that might affect how it should be folded. A tunic with a small tear near the left shoulder, for instance, would require a modified fold that would conceal the damage while still maintaining the proper social signals. The actual folding took place in strict hierarchical order. The emperor's tunics were always handled first, followed by those belonging to his immediate family, then the highest-ranking senators, and so on down through the social order. This wasn't just about respect, it was practical. The folding tables had to be cleaned between each social rank to prevent any contamination that might blur the class distinctions that Roman clothing was designed to maintain. Each fold was performed with ritual precision. The vestiarius would begin by spreading the tunic on the marble surface, smoothing out every wrinkle with ivory tools that had been carved specifically for this purpose. Different tools for different fabrics. Silk required bone implements to prevent snagging, while wool could be handled with slightly rougher ivory pieces. The tools themselves were works of art, often decorated with carved scenes that related to the clothing's social function. The first fold was always the most critical. Called the prima plicatura, it established the foundation for everything that followed. The tunic was lifted by its shoulders and given a gentle shake, exactly 3 times, no more, no less, to allow the fabric to settle into its natural hanging position. Then came the careful positioning of the sleeves, each movement deliberate and measured. The head vestiarius would watch these initial steps closely, because any error here would compromise the entire process. What fascinated observers from other cultures was how seriously Romans took these procedures. Visiting dignitaries from Gaul or Germania would often express amazement at the amount of time and expertise devoted to something as simple as folding clothes. But for Romans, this wasn't simple at all. It was a crucial component of the social machinery that kept their empire functioning. Proper clothing management was seen as both a practical skill and a form of civic duty. The seasonal variations added another layer of complexity. Summer tunics, made from lighter fabrics, required different folding techniques than their winter counterparts. The summer fold, called placatura estiva, emphasized airflow and cooling with specific positioning that would allow air to circulate around the wearer's body. Winter folds focused on heat retention, with tighter, more compact arrangements that would trap warm air close to the skin. But the most intricate variations were reserved for special occasions. Wedding tunics required folds that symbolized fertility and new beginnings, with specific arrangements that would catch light in particular ways during the ceremony. Funeral tunics used somber folding patterns that minimized any decorative elements, while maintaining dignity and respect for the deceased. Military tunics incorporated folds that would allow for easy movement, while still maintaining the wearer's authority and status. The training required to master these techniques was extraordinary. Apprentice vestiari would spend their first 2 years learning nothing but basic fabric handling, how to lift, carry, and position tunics without causing damage or disrupting their intended appearance. Only after mastering these fundamentals would they be allowed to attempt actual folding, starting with the simplest citizen patterns and gradually working their way up through the social hierarchy. The most talented apprentices might eventually specialize in particular types of folds. Some became experts in senatorial garments, others focused on religious vestments, and a very few were selected for training in imperial techniques. The competition was intense, because mastering these skills guaranteed lifetime employment and significant social status. A master vestiarius earned more than many skilled craftsmen and was treated with genuine respect throughout Roman society. The tools used for folding were as specialized as the techniques themselves. Each vestiarius owned a collection of implements that had been crafted specifically for their work, measuring rods made from different materials for different types of fabric, smoothing tools carved from various types of ivory and bone, and positioning guides that helped ensure perfect angles and proportions. These tools were often passed down through families, accumulating both practical wear and sentimental value over generations. The workspace itself was designed with the same attention to detail. The marble folding tables were positioned to take advantage of natural light at different times of day, because the subtle variations in fabric appearance under different lighting conditions could affect how the folds should be arranged. Morning light was considered best for silk garments, while afternoon light was preferred for wool. The tables were also equipped with bronze mirrors positioned at specific angles, allowing the vestiarius to see how the folds would appear from multiple viewpoints. Quality control was rigorous and unforgiving. Each completed fold was inspected by the head vestiarius, who would examine not just the technical accuracy, but also the aesthetic harmony of the arrangement. A fold might be technically perfect, but still be rejected if it didn't achieve the proper visual balance, or if it failed to complement the specific characteristics of that particular tunic. Rejected work had to be completely redone, and repeated failures could result in demotion or dismissal. The social implications of folding errors were serious enough that the imperial household maintained detailed records of every mistake. These records served multiple purposes. They helped identify patterns that might indicate training deficiencies. They provided evidence for personnel decisions, and they created a historical archive that could be consulted when disputes arose about proper techniques. Some of these records survive today, offering fascinating insights into the daily concerns of Roman household management. Seasonal changes brought their own challenges and opportunities. The transition from summer to winter clothing wasn't just a matter of changing fabrics. It required completely different folding techniques and tools. The autumn preparation period was particularly intense, as the entire vestiary staff would work together to prepare the winter wardrobe, while simultaneously maintaining the daily requirements of current clothing. This coordination required careful scheduling and resource management that rivaled the complexity of military logistics. The spring transition was even more elaborate, because it coincided with the Roman social season, when public appearances became more frequent and more scrutinized. Spring tunics needed to project renewal and vitality, while maintaining the dignity appropriate to each wearer's social position. The folding patterns developed for spring wear often incorporated subtle elements that would catch and reflect light in ways that suggested growth and optimism. Religious festivals presented their own folding requirements. Each major deity had associated colors and folding patterns that were considered appropriate for worship and celebration. Tunics worn to honor Mars required folds that suggested strength and military bearing, while those worn for Ceres emphasized abundance and fertility. The vestiari had to maintain detailed calendars showing which folding patterns were appropriate for each religious occasion throughout the year. The economic impact of this elaborate system was substantial. The demand for skilled clothing attendants created entire industries devoted to training, tools, and specialized materials. Master folders commanded high salaries and often operated schools where wealthy families could send their household slaves for training. The tool-making industry developed sophisticated techniques for creating the specialized implements required for different folding methods. Trade relationships were also affected by folding requirements. Silk merchants had to understand not just the quality of their fabrics, but also how different weaves and textures would respond to various folding techniques. This knowledge influenced pricing, marketing, and distribution strategies throughout the Mediterranean trade network. Fabrics that folded well, using Roman techniques, commanded premium prices, while those that proved difficult to work with were relegated to lower status applications. The influence of Roman folding techniques extended far beyond the borders of the empire. Wealthy elites in client kingdoms often adopted Roman folding patterns as a way of demonstrating their sophistication and political alignment. This cultural export helped solidify Roman influence in regions where direct military control might have been difficult to maintain. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Roman tunic folding was how it evolved over time while maintaining its essential character. New techniques were constantly being developed, often in response to changes in fabric technology or social customs. Yet, these innovations were always incorporated within the existing framework of social meaning and practical function. The system was both rigid enough to maintain its communicative power and flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. The daily rhythm of the imperial laundry reflected this balance between tradition and innovation. Each morning brought the familiar routine of sorting, inspecting, and folding, but within that routine there was always room for subtle refinements and improvements. Master folders were encouraged to experiment with new techniques, provided they maintained the essential social and aesthetic principles that made the system function. As the day progressed and the primary folding work was completed, the atmosphere in the laundry would gradually become more relaxed. Junior apprentices would clean and organize the tools, while senior staff reviewed the day's work and planned for tomorrow's requirements. This was often when innovations were discussed and new techniques were shared between different specialists. The evening routine involved careful storage of the completed work. Each folded tunic was placed in its designated location within the vast wardrobe systems that honeycombed the underground levels of the imperial palace. These storage areas were marvels of organization, with specific spaces for different types of garments, different social occasions, and different seasons. The storage techniques themselves were almost as complex as the folding, because improper storage could undo hours of careful work. The records kept of this daily work provide remarkable insights into Roman attitudes toward labor, skill, and social organization. The vestiari took genuine pride in their work, not just as a means of earning their living, but as a contribution to the smooth functioning of Roman society. Their detailed attention to seemingly minor aspects of clothing management reflected a broader Roman belief that civilization itself depended on getting countless small details exactly right. This attention to detail extended to the training of new staff. The apprenticeship system was designed not just to teach technical skills, but to instill the attitudes and values that made the entire system work. Apprentices learned not just how to fold tunics, but why the folding mattered, how it connected to broader social and political structures, and what their role meant within the larger context of Roman civilization. The master folders understood that they were preserving and transmitting a complex cultural knowledge that went far beyond simple clothing management. They were maintaining a system of social communication that helped keep Roman society stable and functional. This understanding gave dignity and importance to work that outsiders might have dismissed as merely domestic labor. As night fell over the imperial palace, the vestiari would complete their final inspections and secure their work areas. The folded tunics would rest in their designated places, ready to carry their owners through another day of Roman political and social life. The tools would be cleaned and stored, the work surfaces prepared for tomorrow's tasks, and the great machinery of imperial clothing management would pause until dawn brought another day of careful, precise, essential work. In the quiet darkness of the underground chambers, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, the vestiari could take satisfaction in knowing that they had contributed to something much larger than themselves. They had helped maintain the complex system of social communication that kept the Roman world functioning, one perfectly folded tunic at a time. Their work would continue tomorrow, and the day after, and for as long as Rome itself endured, a testament to the extraordinary human capacity for finding meaning and dignity in even the most detailed and specialized forms of labor.